deaths of Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman and his wife, whose bodies were found in their Santa Fe home.
1425 Old Sunset Trail, where Gene Hackman, 95, and his wife Betsy Arakawa, 65, and a dog were found deceased.
When authorities finally entered the secluded Santa Fe residence of legendary actor Gene Hackman after news of his death, they uncovered something beneath the iconic star's home that no one had anticipated. What investigators found inside the quiet estate quickly turned an already shocking moment into an even deeper mystery.
First look at newly released body camera video showing police responding to the home of actor Gene Hackman.
A hidden tunnel lay beneath his private library. As investigators followed the narrow passage underground, their flashlights suddenly revealed a reinforced iron door, locked tightly from the inside. It looked far more like a military vault than anything meant for a private home. The discovery immediately raised troubling questions. Who had sealed the door from the other side? And why would something like this be hidden beneath the home of one of Hollywood's most respected actors?
All going there.
Yeah, we ran around the whole property. It's huge. It's a big property.
Because what investigators would soon uncover beneath the estate of Gene Hackman hinted that a long-forgotten story had been buried beneath the desert for decades. The day the estate fell silent on the morning of February 26, 2025, a line of official vehicles slowly approached a remote compound tucked deep within the wooded hills outside Santa Fe, New Mexico. The property belonged to Gene Hackman and his wife, Betsy Arakawa, and for years locals had known it as one of the most private estates in the region. Tall reinforced steel gates guarded the entrance, and beyond them the residents sat surrounded by forest and desert terrain that made the compound nearly invisible from nearby roads. It was a place designed for quiet living and absolute privacy. Authorities had not arrived because of a routine request from family. Instead, concern had been raised by a handyman who had grown increasingly uneasy after repeated attempts to contact the household went unanswered. The estate usually operated with strict organization, and the sudden silence surrounding it felt deeply unusual. When deputies reached the gates, they quickly realized entry would require force. The property had been locked from the inside, meaning no one had opened the gates for several days. Officers eventually cut through the locks and pushed open the heavy steel barriers before stepping onto the grounds. Inside the house, they encountered a tragic scene. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa were both found deceased, with their dog nearby. Medical examiners later determined that Arakawa had died roughly a week earlier from hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare respiratory illness linked to rodent exposure in the American Southwest. Hackman himself, who was 95 at the time, died later from heart disease, with contributing factors including advanced Alzheimer's disease. On paper, the explanation seemed straightforward, suggesting both deaths resulted from natural causes. Yet the timeline created a detail investigators could not easily ignore. For nearly a week after his wife's death, Hackman had remained inside the home without contacting anyone outside the property. No emergency call had been placed, and no message had been sent requesting help. Later analysis of the actor's pacemaker data suggested his heart likely stopped around February 17th, meaning both he and his wife had been dead inside the home for several days before anyone discovered them. When deputies first moved through the residence, the atmosphere felt strangely frozen in time. One of the couple's dogs had died inside the house while two others were still alive, wandering through rooms where daily life had abruptly stopped. There were scattered prescription bottles near Arakawa's body, a space heater positioned nearby, and no signs of forced entry or struggle. Even so, the scene felt unusual enough that investigators described the deaths as suspicious enough to warrant a full search of the property. Authorities publicly stated that they found no evidence of foul play, yet they still authorized a complete forensic examination of the estate. That decision suggested something about the property itself had drawn their attention. At first, the investigation focused on the house and surrounding grounds. Deputies photographed every room, cataloged personal items, and documented the structure itself. But eventually the search led them somewhere no one expected. Behind the quiet walls of Hackman's private library, investigators discovered a concealed mechanism, an entry point suggesting the estate might be hiding far more than the tragic story of its final days. And once that hidden passage was opened, the investigation began descending into a part of the property that had likely remained unseen for generations. The house that guarded its secrets. The deeper investigators explored the estate, the more they began to notice unusual design choices that made the property feel less like an ordinary home and more like a carefully controlled environment. The compound was surrounded by dense forest, but natural barriers were only part of the protection. Motion sensors monitored entry points throughout the land, while thermal cameras tracked movement along the perimeter walls. This type of security system was far more sophisticated than what most private homeowners install. It resembled technology used at secure facilities where controlling access is considered essential. Even some of the responding deputies reportedly remarked that the surveillance layout looked more like something designed for sensitive infrastructure than for a private residence tucked quietly into the hills of New Mexico. Several cameras were positioned in overlapping patterns that eliminated blind spots across the property. The layout suggested that whoever designed the system had not simply been concerned with keeping intruders out, but with monitoring movement across the estate itself. Every approach to the house appeared visible from multiple angles. Inside the house, however, the atmosphere felt very different. The interior spaces reflected decades of careful collecting and preservation, filled many of the rooms. A few pieces were rumored to have once belonged to European aristocratic families. The chandeliers hanging above the central halls appeared to predate the widespread use of electric lighting, suggesting they may have once illuminated historic buildings from another era. Even the gardens surrounding the home had been curated with extraordinary care. Rare botanical species were planted across the grounds, forming a living collection few private estates could rival. Winding stone paths curved through carefully arranged greenery, and some plants were so unusual that visiting horticultural experts reportedly struggled to identify them. Despite the estate's beauty, researchers who attempted to study the land's history encountered unusual obstacles. Building permits tied to the property contained partially redacted information, and official records revealed unexplained gaps. One historian reportedly spent months researching documents connected to the land before abruptly abandoning the project without ever publishing his findings. Former employees also maintained an unusual level of silence about what they had seen inside the estate. Gardeners, maintenance workers, and housekeepers who had worked there over the years rarely spoke publicly about their experiences. In a world where information often spreads quickly through casual conversations or social media, that silence suggested discretion was deeply embedded in the culture of the property. Some investigators later suggested that the house itself seemed designed to compartmentalize activity. Certain corridors felt unusually narrow for a residence of its size, and several walls appeared thicker than expected, as though they concealed structural features that were not immediately visible. At first, these details seemed like little more than architectural quirks. But as investigators continued documenting the layout, a subtle pattern began to emerge, one hinting that the estate might contain spaces deliberately hidden from view. It was during this closer examination of the structure that investigators finally uncovered the feature that would transform the entire investigation. Concealed behind the quiet walls of Gene Hackman's private library was a hidden passage, an entry point suggesting the house had been guarding its most important secret beneath the surface all along. The tunnel beneath the library, Gene Hackman's private library, was designed as a space for quiet reflection. Tall bookshelves covered the walls, and antique furniture created an atmosphere that felt both comfortable and timeless. At first glance, nothing about the room seemed unusual, but investigators soon noticed subtle signs that the space had recently been disturbed. Several pieces of furniture had been shifted slightly, and a number of books appeared to have been removed and returned in the wrong order. Along the lower shelves, a thin layer of dust showed faint streaks where something had been moved not long before investigators arrived. To most people, those marks would have gone unnoticed. To trained eyes, however, they suggested movement in a room that otherwise looked frozen in time. After examining the walls more closely, investigators discovered a concealed mechanical seam hidden within the architectural detailing. The craftsmanship was so precise that someone could stand inside the library countless times without ever realizing the wall concealed a hidden entrance. When the mechanism was finally triggered, part of the wall shifted open with a low grinding sound, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness beneath the house. As investigators carefully moved down the steps with their flashlights, the environment changed almost immediately. The temperature dropped, and the air carried a faint metallic scent that lingered in the confined space. The sound of their footsteps echoed strangely against the stone, as if the tunnel extended far beyond the reach of their lights. Each step downward seemed to distance them further from the quiet world of the house above. Several investigators later described the descent as deeply disorienting. The passageway seemed to absorb sound in unusual ways, and even the faint movement of air created a low, whispering echo along the stone walls. Condensation clung to the surfaces, and strange markings slowly began to appear along the stone as they moved deeper underground. The stone walls of the tunnel were covered with strange markings. Some resembled symbols linked to ancient alchemical traditions, while others looked more like diagrams formed from geometric shapes and mechanical patterns. In one section, investigators found an elaborate drawing of gears and chambers arranged in a design that hinted at a complicated system whose purpose was not immediately clear. Several investigators later noted that the markings did not appear decorative. They looked deliberate, almost instructional, as if someone had once expected the tunnel to be understood by those capable of reading the symbols. The deeper the team moved, the older the construction seemed to become. The upper sections of the tunnel showed signs of modern reinforcement with steel beams and poured concrete. But farther down, the stonework grew rough and uneven, revealing tool marks left by older hand-carving methods such as chisels and picks. Small fragments of rock littered the floor, and parts of the passage narrowed in ways that suggested the tunnel had been expanded or modified over time. Structural engineers later proposed that the oldest sections of the passage might date back more than a century. That meant the tunnel likely existed long before Gene Hackman ever purchased the property, an unsettling realization for investigators standing deep underground that day. The tunnel beneath the library had not been built for the house. The house had been built on top of the tunnel. The chamber of forgotten records at the bottom of the staircase. The passage opened into a large underground chamber that felt strangely preserved, as if time itself had slowed within its walls. Wooden crates lined the room, some collapsing under age while others remained surprisingly intact. Inside the crates, investigators discovered photographs, documents, and metal objects that appeared to come from several different historical periods. Many of the photographs showed unfamiliar individuals gathered around tables covered with maps and papers. Their clothing suggested the images were taken in the early 20th century. One photograph showed a small group of men standing in a dimly lit room beneath a single hanging bulb. On the back of the photo, someone had written the year 1937, followed by a word investigators initially struggled to decipher. Nearby, leather-bound files contained coded entries, partially redacted names, and references to events that did not appear in publicly available records. Some pages had been partially burned, as though someone had once tried to destroy them before stopping halfway through. At the far end of the chamber stood the iron door investigators had first noticed while descending the tunnel. It was built from thick steel panels reinforced with heavy rivets, resembling security doors used in mid-20th century installations. The lock confirmed what investigators had already suspected. The door had been sealed from the inside. A landscape of hidden history, the location of Hackman's estate adds another layer to the mystery. Santa Fe sits less than an hour from Los Alamos National Laboratory, where scientists developed the first atomic weapons during World War II. In the decades that followed, northern New Mexico became home to numerous classified facilities and underground structures built to support sensitive research. Government records later confirmed that networks of tunnels and reinforced bunkers were constructed throughout the region during the Cold War. Some were eventually sealed or abandoned, while others remained documented only in restricted archives. Neighbors living near the estate occasionally reported strange sounds coming from beneath the ground late at night. One longtime resident recalled feeling low vibrations that seemed mechanical rather than natural. Another neighbor, a geologist, once attempted to measure the activity with a portable seismometer. According to his account, the readings suggested rhythmic movement rather than normal seismic patterns. Whether those observations were connected to the tunnel beneath Hackman's property remains unclear. What investigators do know is that when the gates of the estate were finally opened in February 2025, a forgotten story began to surface from beneath the desert landscape. And somewhere beyond that sealed iron door, the final piece of that story may still be waiting. What do you think investigators might eventually discover beyond the iron door beneath the estate of Gene Hackman? Share your thoughts in the comments. And subscribe for more deep documentary stories uncovering mysteries hidden beneath real historical events.